Episode 176, the 2019 RegenEarth online conference, Backyard Regen. This is the World Organic News, the week ending 8th of July 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. So, this climate change thing, what's to be done? In the white English-speaking world, of which I am a part, this whole climate change thing has become quite politicised. This is something I can't quite understand, and yet seems perfectly obvious. The can't understand part. The evidence seems quite clear. I'm not particularly interested in the consensus of scientists argument, because you could have used the same argument on an Earth-centred solar system and you'd have been wrong 400 years ago. No, I've been convinced by the evidence, both empirical and on the ground, so to speak. I've spoken before of the farmer who's cutting silage 10 weeks earlier than his father did 30 years ago. I've spoken also of the grape growers moving from the southern parts of the Australian mainland to the most southerly state of Tasmania, because they are unable to achieve the wines they want with shorter growing seasons and warmer harvest times on the mainland. They have records running over a century, which remained within fairly tight extremities until the 1970s, when those temperature records all started heading into higher and therefore warmer territory. The length and nature of the droughts we are experiencing in Australia seem to point that way too, but I have studied enough archaeology to know that there were 40 and 60-year droughts in Australia's past, yet the severity at the moment does seem to be increasing. Now to the perfectly obvious. Those most likely to suffer economically from any change to remove CO2 from the atmosphere are the fossil fuel and ancillary industries, if action is actually taken on a governmental level to decarbonise the air and recarbonise the soil. This includes every business involved not just in fuel production, but industrialised food production, the current food systems, logging, mining, and I could go on. Now, these industries are capable of and do lobby the bejesus out of governments. It's almost like the most money wins, but that can't be, especially in liberal rules-based democracies, because that would be corruption. Insert sarcasm marker here. So, as I say, the climate change situation on our hands needs to be addressed. The politics of it is atrocious. The IPCC and the UN reckon we have just over 11 years to get this mess sorted before the ship well and truly hits the sand. Now all this got me thinking. Of the many things we are told, in inverted commas, to do to make a real difference, none of them actually seems to either make a difference or improve our lives. Let me list a few. The end of single-use plastic straws. These were replaced by paper straws, wrapped in plastic. The plastic wrapping clearly won't as easily kill sea turtles, but it'll still add to the amount of this crap in the oceans. Of course, paper straws come from paper, which means more deforestation, even on a plantation level. I don't use straws, but ones that collapse and become soggy during use are probably not enhancing anyone's lives. The end of single-use plastic bags. The bags we used to take our groceries home in were never single-use anyway. That was just part of the propaganda. I use some to hold dirty socks when I change my shoes and socks at work. I use some as bin liners. Yes, we need to fix the plastics problem, but there are better ways than changing from thin plastic bags to heavier duty ones, which many people still buy at the grocery shop and then toss out anyway. Who benefits from this? Probably the supermarkets who now sell bags rather than giving them away, and of course the plastic manufacturers. And again, how have our lives been improved by this momentous change? Then there's recycling, and this one's one of my favourites. To be virtuous and save the planet, we put different coloured glass in different containers at recycling centres. We separate our plastics. Do we even know which plastics are actually recyclable? And then China First and other Southeast Asian countries decided that they were not going to take the crap we didn't want anymore. Whoops, huge stockpiles of plastic waste. not really a solution. Elsewhere in this podcast, in too many episodes even to think about, the idea of replacing fossil fuel-based plastics with hemp or seaweed or anything cellulose at the start of the production system would stop the build-up of plastics out there in the biosphere and in here, our bodies, in our solid bodily waste, which apparently most humans now have microplastics in their solid wastes. But me having to use the same heavy-duty plastic bag more than once, that hasn't changed jack shit. And remember, these initiatives came from the brains behind the big environmental lobby groups, your Greenpeaces, your Worldwide Fund for Natures and their ilk. These groups have, in my mind, become so big and almost pointless as they chase down initiatives to bring kudos and donors that I believe they have been subsumed by their opponents and are nothing more but the mirror image of the corporations and governments they have been trying to influence. But has there been anything that actually made a difference, I hear you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here in Australia, the solar PV industry springs to mind. True enough, it was given a funding boost by governments, especially in Germany, but elsewhere too. And it grew to such a size that economies of scale brought the price for households down to economically sensible levels. Next thing you know, private citizens are purchasing these things like they're going out of style. Rooftop solar PV has penetrated the Australian energy market to the point where a leading generator is now closing coal-fired power stations and actually incentivising customers to purchase the things. What's actually going on here? People have taken up a technology, more than likely from an economic self-interest point of view, that actually improves our climate situation. With a little more effort from those with their hands on the levers of government, this could become the reality for all rooftops across this wide brown land and out across the world. And here's the point that struck me. Solar PV has the double-edged advantages of improving the purchaser's life and the planet's. Tinkering with the type of plastic bags available at supermarkets does neither. It might allow some people to feel virtuous for their sacrifice, and that's my point. We need to introduce people to systems with no virtuosity required that actually make the world a better place. As you may have realised from past episodes, decarbonising the air is just not enough. We need to recarbonise the soil. The whole Regen ag thing is in good hands. I think we need to reach more people than just farmers. After all, there are only about 86,000 farming businesses in Australia in a population of 24.6 million. Even allowing for 5 actual farmers per enterprise, that's only 1.75% of the population. I'm pretty sure I'm overestimating there. No, we need to mobilise, incentivise and inform the vast bulk of people who live in urban, suburban areas of cities and regional towns. While all these thoughts were fermenting in the deeper recesses of my mind, a quote from the late Bill Mollison kept popping up. Quote, "The greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production, even if on a small scale, in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there is enough for everyone." End quote. To that end, and in several deep and satisfying discussions with my friend and co-host of Permaculture Plus, Rich Bowden, we decided it was time to put together something that would allow people to regen their own small pieces of land. The principles hold true from a window box to rangelands, but more people live at the smaller land size end of that continuum than at the larger. The thing I discovered talking to people as I'm setting up a horticulture program at work, it's the automatic assumption amongst non-regen, non-permaculture and non-Fukuoka natural gardeners is that any form of gardening is really hard work if you don't use chemicals. So clearly the fine listeners to this program know that this is not the case. Thankfully I found an old pic of Masanobu Fukuoka sitting on a hilltop with the quote, "What less can I do?" which made me giggle. Once the initial setup is done, the raised beds built, with thought, the hard work is over. So Rich and I have put our money where our mouths are and have been for decades. We are bringing to birth the RegenEarth 2019 online conference, Living Soils. Link most definitely in the show notes. This year's conference is focused specifically on backyard regen. Can you imagine a situation where instead of sucking fossil fuels in the form of petrol and chemicals, suburban gardens were, in reality, carbon sinks? It's not that hard to do. It's not even that hard to envisage, and I get a little giddy just thinking about it. To that end, we have collected together a series of presenters covering the following topics: why regen matters, how we can future-proof our world, community nutrition, locally grown food and seed saving, what actually is soil and how should we handle it, the easy do-it-yourself no-dig garden, why and how, earthworms, why we need them and how to keep them happy, the gentle but confusing art of compost, using animals in the backyard garden, guinea pigs, rabbits and chickens. The chicken is the powerhouse of nutrient cycling in your garden, and a brief introduction to permaculture design in the backyard. All these topics will be covered over a 3-night period from the 16th of September to the 18th of September. They will run from approximately 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time. I'm not sure how that works across the rest of the planet, but we have backups for people who can't attend as the sessions go live. We have tried to keep costs down and still be able to pay our presenters. We have been able to offer this event for the truly remarkably good value price of $67 Australian, which I think is about 47 US dollars and about 37 quid in the UK, and maybe 32 euros, something like that. This gives you access to the live 6 hours over the 3 nights, access to replay the sessions, and membership of a closed Facebook group for discussions as the presenters deliver their material. We really hope this group will become a dynamic living entity where we can explore the regen world, ask others for advice, and as a place to share our efforts in the regen area. We, Rich and I, would be privileged to have you as our guests for this event. There's a link in the show notes to the Backyard Regen 2019 conference. Please have a look. In fact, it's basically the only link in the show notes, that and our email address. We both think that many of the listeners to this podcast and our other podcasts will find great hope, inspiration and purpose from attending this online conference. Remember, we only need to turn 10% of suburbia from consumption into production to change the world. I have been amazed by the reaction of everyone I've spoken to about this conference, and I'd hope to see you there in our virtual conference centre. Any questions, thoughts, concerns or feedback can be sent to regen@regenearth.net. And on that note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.